Usually enterprise software is, well, it's basically like plumbing.
Yeah, exactly. Just laying pipes.
Right. You lay the pipes down, you turn the valve, and your data just flows exactly where you expect it to go. I mean, it is a highly predictable engineering project.
Most of the time, anyway.
Right. But the thing is, deploying enterprise artificial intelligence, it isn't plumbing at all. It's much more like trying to manage a colony of bees.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, because it's complex, right? It's autonomous.
Yeah.
And if you don't know exactly what you are doing, you are going to get stung.
Yeah.
And we are looking at a landscape right now where a staggering 72% of enterprise AI projects just fail post-deployment.
Wow, 72%.
They just completely collapse under the weight of real-world application.
And, that collapse almost always comes down to entirely inadequate evaluation frameworks, because companies are essentially out there building these massive, incredibly powerful digital engines without ever installing a dashboard to monitor how they are actually running.
Exactly. But, and this is the fascinating part, a specific 28% of companies are actually figuring it out.
Right, the successful ones.
Yeah. The enterprises that are getting this multi-agent orchestration right, they are seeing their operational costs just plummet by like 35 to 40%. And that is alongside a 50% increase in decision cycle speeds.
That is massive for any organization.
It really is. So today, our mission for this deep dive is to find out exactly what that 28% knows that everyone else is just completely missing.
I love it. Let's get into it.
So we are pulling all of our answers today directly from this really comprehensive 2026 enterprise guide. It was published by AetherLink.
Right, the Dutch AI consulting firm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They are heavily embedded in this space, especially through their product lines, Aetherbot, Aethermind, and AetherTV.
Yeah, and for any European business leaders or, CTOs or developers listening to this deep dive right now, the context here is absolutely mission critical.
Oh, totally.
Because the AetherLink guide establishes that what we call agentic AI has fully transitioned. I mean, it is no longer just a viral sandbox experiment.
Right. It's not a toy anymore.
No, not at all. It is a completely production-ready framework now in 2026. So our goal today isn't to just sit here and marvel at the cool technology.
Right.
We are going to actually examine the actual mechanisms of how European enterprises are building, scaling, and, optimizing these systems, all while navigating the incredibly strict guardrails of the EU AI Act.
Which is a huge deal.
Exactly, because a pristine, highly intelligent architecture means absolutely nothing if regulators just shut your company down on day one.
Yeah, that is a very quick way to lose your job.
Correct.
So before we get into how a company actually shaves, 40% off its operational budget, I think we need to clarify what is actually doing the heavy lifting here.
Right, the core technology.
Because the paradigm has completely shifted away from the standard AI models that everyone was just sort of playing with a couple of years ago.
Oh, absolutely. The shift from basic chatbots to agentic AI is fundamental. I mean, we really don't need to spend much time defining a standard chatbot.
No, I think we all know it's reactive.
Exactly. You prompt it, it responds to you, and then it basically just goes to sleep. But an agentic system, however, operates continuously.
It's always on.
Yeah, always on.
Yeah.
You give an agent a complex, really open-ended objective, and it proactively perceives its environment. It takes that massive goal, and it breaks it down into a logical sequence of subtasks.
That is the key difference right there.
It really is. It iterates, it triggers external APIs, it queries your internal databases, and most importantly, it actively pivots its strategy if it hits a dead end.
So if we go back to the basic chatbot, it is kind of like a calculator waiting for a formula. But this new agent, it's like hiring a junior analyst.
That is a great way to put it.
Yeah, because you don't ask an analyst for the square root of a number. You say, we need a quarterly risk assessment for the European market.
Right, and they just go do it.
Exactly. That agent knows how to boot up Excel, authenticate into a secure database, pull all the historical metrics, synthesize the risk factors, and then actually draft the executive summary for you.
Which is incredibly powerful, but, and this is a big but, attempting to build one single massive AI model to act as a universal junior analyst across an entire enterprise is just a recipe for disaster.
Why is that?
Well, monolithic models are notoriously difficult to update, and they are highly prone to bottlenecking.
Oh, right, because everything is funneling through one brain.
Exactly. So enterprises are moving toward what AetherLink calls multi-agent orchestration, or deploying agent meshes.
Agent meshes. So that implies a distributed network then.
Yes, exactly. It is a network of hyper-specialized agents collaborating with each other. So, for example, you deploy one agent whose only job in the entire world is to efficiently query unstructured SQL databases.
Just a data fetcher.
Right. Then you deploy another agent that is entirely fine-tuned just to interpret German labor compliance rules.
Okay, very specific.
And maybe a third agent specializes exclusively in drafting external vendor communications. And they hand off context and coordinate with each other to achieve the overarching goal.
Like an actual corporate department?
Precisely like a department.
Wait, hold on, though. I need to interrupt here because I was looking at the math in this AetherLink guide, and a virtual office of AI agents constantly chattering with each other, it sounds, well, mathematically disastrous.
It can be, if you do it wrong.
Because the guide itself notes that a single multi-step task executed by an agent might take something like 15 to 50 LLM calls.
Yeah, that's accurate.
So the agent is querying another agent, which then pings a database, which sends data back, which requires more reasoning. I mean, if you multiply 50 LLM calls by thousands of daily requests across a massive enterprise, a CFO looking at those compute costs is going to, pull the plug by Tuesday.
They absolutely would.
So how does that not instantly bankrupt a company?
Well, the friction of that exact compute cost is exactly why so many of those early pilot programs made up that 72% failure rate we talked about.
Ah, okay. So that was the stumbling block.
Yeah, but the underlying technological backbone has evolved specifically to solve this, to fix the latency and the sheer cost of agents talking to each other.
Right.
And the first major mechanism keeping this sustainable is MCP, the Model Context Protocol.
Okay, right. Because before MCP, if an OpenAI-based agent needed to communicate with, say, a local open source agent just to retrieve a file, developers had to write custom, highly brittle translation code for every single interaction, right?
Yeah, it was a brittle, expensive mess, just a nightmare to maintain.
I can imagine.
So MCP acts basically as a universal USB-C port for agentic communication.
Oh, I love that, the USB-C of AI.
Exactly. It completely standardizes the data shape. So any agent can request resources, share context memory, and just coordinate workflows seamlessly.
Regardless of the vendor.
Yep, regardless of the vendor or whatever the underlying model is. When AetherTV builds a custom architecture for a client, they use MCP so these agents can plug directly into a company's legacy systems.
Without needing massive integration overhead.
Right. Standardizing that communication basically eliminates the latency of translating data formats back and forth, and that directly slashes the computing time you are paying for on the server.
That makes total sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second breakthrough that the guide mentions alongside MCP is RG 2.0, so Retrieval Augmented Generation.
Yes, RG 2.0 is huge.
Because I think we are all pretty familiar with the basic concept of RAG, feeding internal company documents to an AI. But the upgrade to 2.0 seems highly focused on the actual quality of the retrieval.
Because RG 1.0 was, well, it was basically a blind librarian.
A blind librarian.
Yeah, it just grabbed whatever document had matching keywords and threw it indiscriminately right into the AI's context window.
Oh, right. Just hoping for the best.
Exactly. But RG 2.0 is dynamic and it's multimodal. An agent can simultaneously synthesize text, video, and audio. But the really crucial mechanism for the CFO's budget is the dynamic indexing and confidence scoring.
Meaning the agent actually evaluates the data before it even uses it.
Precisely. It reads the retrieved document, it assesses if the source is credible, and if it's actually relevant to the specific context of the prompt.
Wow.
And only then does it decide whether to include it in its reasoning process. Forrester Research actually tracked this in 2025, and they found that RA 2.0 implementations reduce hallucination rates by 68%.
68%. That is massive.
It really is. And think about the cost savings. If your AI isn't blindly pulling irrelevant data and hallucinating fake answers, you aren't wasting compute power generating useless text.
Right, and you aren't wasting human labor hours trying to fix the AI's mistakes afterward.
Exactly.
The guide also outlines a series of practical, everyday cost optimization strategies. And the first one that really stood out to me is prompt caching.
Oh yeah, prompt caching is a game changer.
Because if an agent needs to reference a 500-page corporate compliance manual just to process basic HR requests, feeding that entire 500-page manual into the LMM context window every single time an employee asks a question, that eats up a staggering amount of expensive tokens.
Just burning money.
Right. So prompt caching essentially saves that baseline knowledge in the system's short-term memory, right?
Yeah.
And the AetherLink data shows that alone cuts token consumption by 30 to 60%.
And the best part is it pairs perfectly with what they call model routing.
Model routing, let's break that down.
Well, there is zero business logic in waking up an expensive, heavy-hitting frontier AI model just to answer a routine question about the company holiday schedule.
Right, you don't need a supercomputer for that.
No, you don't. You route the simple, mundane queries to smaller, open-source, highly efficient models, and then you reserve the massive, expensive models strictly for deep logical reasoning.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and that dual model strategy reliably drops operational costs by another 25 to 40%.
Wow. But I have to say, my absolute favorite cost-saving mechanism in the guide is agent planning optimization.
It's a really interesting concept.
Because it sounds completely counterintuitive on the surface. I mean, you would naturally assume that if an AI spends more time, thinking or mapping out its plan, it is using more compute power and therefore driving up the invoice.
Right, that is the logical assumption. But the data tells a completely different story.
It really does.
Yeah.
The guide shows that if you force an agent to critically decompose a task, to create a step-by-step logic tree before it actually takes its first action, it requires 20 to 35% fewer tool calls.
Yeah, because it isn't just blindly pinging external databases through trial and error.
Exactly, it has a roadmap. And combining the caching, the model routing, and this planning optimization is how Gartner estimates organizations can achieve that 40 to 55% reduction in total agentic operational costs within just a single year.
It is incredible. But, and here is the big reality check for anyone listening,
Let's hear it.
a pristine, highly optimized, cost-effective architecture means absolutely nothing if it buckles under the weight of European regulatory scrutiny.
Right, the EU AI Act.
Exactly. We established earlier that 72% of these projects fail. The technology works, yes, and the costs can be managed, but deploying autonomous agents in Europe means you have to pass the ultimate real-world test.
Yeah, because you are no longer just dealing with a software bug that you can, patch in the next sprint.
Not at all.
You are dealing with a compliance violation that can incur massive company-ending fines.
And AetherLink actually breaks that specific bottleneck down into 6 core dimensions of evaluation that an agentic system absolutely must pass before it goes into production.
6 dimensions, what are they?
Well, accuracy and efficiency are standard, obviously, and safety and consistency are expected. But the real hurdles, the things that trip companies up, are interpretability and compliance.
Interpretability, it really reminds me of middle school math class.
Oh, how so?
Well, it wasn't enough to just write the correct answer at the bottom of the test, right?
Yeah.
The teacher gave you 0 credit unless you showed your work.
Oh, yes, I remember that pain.
Yeah. You had to mathematically prove the exact steps you took to arrive at that conclusion.
And that is precisely the mechanism the EU AI Act mandates now, especially for what they classify as high-risk systems.
High-risk systems like what?
Like if your enterprise is deploying an AI agent to make autonomous decisions regarding, say, employment screening or credit approvals or managing critical infrastructure, you cannot legally operate a black box system in those areas.
So if an auditor comes knocking, the AI cannot just say, loan denied, and then when asked why, just respond with, well, because my neural network calculated it.
Exactly. That will not fly. The legal requirement is autonomous decision logging.
Autonomous decision logging. Okay.
Because agentic systems iterate through multiple reasoning steps, right? And they pull from various databases. So organizations must capture a transparent, completely immutable audit trail of the intermediate reasoning steps.
That sounds intense.
It is. You need to be able to trace exactly which specific document the agent retrieved. You have to know how it weighted that specific piece of information against internal policies, and you have to show the exact logical branch it followed to take the final action.
Wow. But attempting to bolt that level of granular logging onto a pre-existing multi-agent mesh,
Right.
I mean, that sounds computationally exhausting, if not entirely impossible.
It usually just breaks the system.
Right.
Which is exactly why Aethermind focuses so heavily on consulting enterprises to build these governance frameworks into the foundational architecture from literally day one.
Right. Explainability just cannot be an afterthought anymore.
It absolutely cannot.
Okay, so let's take all of this theory, the multi-agent orchestration, the RVEG G.0, the EU AI Act compliance, and let's actually look at what happens when it hits real-world messy data.
Yes, the case study.
Yeah, the AetherTV case study regarding a mid-sized financial services firm. I think it is the perfect encapsulation of this entire deep dive.
The fintech compliance study, they were facing a very classic operational bottleneck.
Completely drowning. I mean, if you are managing a team right now, just put yourself in this scenario. They had 40 full-time employees entirely bogged down doing manual fraud detection and regulatory reporting.
40 people just doing that.
Yes. And despite dedicating 40 human beings to this task, the legacy software they were using was throwing a 15 to 20% false positive rate.
Which is just brutal for morale.
Brutal. They were wasting thousands of labor hours chasing ghosts, basically.
Yeah.
Because the old, rigid rules flagged perfectly normal transactions as suspicious.
Right, and human reviewers suffer from alert fatigue so quickly.
Exactly.
So they brought in AetherTV. And rather than trying to build one monolithic AI to just, replace the software all at once, they engineered this highly elegant 3-agent mesh.
Okay, let's really break down the mechanics of how that mesh actually functions.
Yeah.
Because I think it highlights exactly why specialization outperforms a single model.
Let's do it.
So Agent 1, it is purely dedicated to data retrieval. It leverages that dynamic RG 2.0 technology we talked about.
Yeah.
So the moment a transaction occurs, Agent 1 fires up. It queries the internal transaction history, it pulls external risk feeds, and it synthesizes all the contextual background on the customers and the counterparties involved.
Basically, it gathers all the necessary puzzle pieces and standardizes them.
Exactly. And then it hands that data package over to Agent 2, which is the risk analysis agent.
And this agent does not pull data.
No data pulling at all. Its sole function is to evaluate the transaction against over 200 specific regulatory rules.
And it doesn't just, read the rules, right? It uses models that are fine-tuned specifically for financial domain accuracy.
Right. It analyzes the patterns, it flags anything suspicious, and crucially, it attaches a confidence score.
Ah, the confidence score.
Yeah, so it's not just generating a binary fraud or not fraud. It is outputting something like, based on these 3 specific variables, I am 92% confident this transaction violates Rule 47.
That is incredible precision. Which brings us to Agent 3, the compliance reporting agent.
The paperwork agent.
Basically, yes. This agent takes the weighted findings from Agent 2, and it automatically generates the required regulatory documentation.
Okay, so it does the logging.
Exactly. It builds the audit trails, it formats the intermediate reasoning steps, and it ensures that the entire pipeline strictly satisfies the transparency and logging requirements of the EU AI Act that we just discussed.
It is honestly a beautifully clean assembly line of specialized digital labor.
It really is.
And the results they achieved, it fundamentally changed the output of their entire department. Let's look at the metrics in the guide.
Let's hear them.
The manual review workload went from 40 full-time employees down to 8.
Wow.
That is an 83% reduction in manual labor.
And the important context there is that those 32 employees weren't just laid off, they were redeployed.
Exactly. They were freed up to focus on complex, high-level investigations instead of just staring at mindless spreadsheets all day.
Right, so you aren't just saving money, you are elevating the actual capability of your human workforce.
Totally. And the quality drastically improved, too. That 15 to 20% false positive rate dropped to an astonishing 3.2%.
That alone saves so much time.
Yeah, and review times fell completely off a cliff. A manual review that used to take a human analyst 12 minutes was handled by the agent mesh in 1.4 minutes.
1.4 minutes. That is amazing.
And the bottom line for the CFO, the one we were worried about earlier.
Yes, the compute costs.
Total cost of ownership dropped by 45% compared to their old legacy approach.
Wow. Because they use specialized agents, they could optimize each component independently.
Right. If the EU updated a regulatory rule, the firm only had to adjust Agent 2. They didn't have to retrain an entire monolithic system from scratch.
And because Agent 3 was specifically engineered for compliance from the ground up, they achieved regulatory audit readiness without slowing down the analytical processing speed of the other 2 agents at all.
It truly serves as a blueprint for the future of enterprise architecture.
It really does.
So to wrap up this deep dive, let's distill all of these mechanisms, the cost optimizations, the regulatory frameworks, let's distill it down to the most critical insights you need to take back to your team.
Right, the multi-million-dollar takeaways.
My number one takeaway from the AetherLink guide is that the era of relying on one massive, know-it-all AI model is simply over.
It really is.
That was merely a stepping stone. The future of the enterprise is multi-agent orchestration, building a distributed mesh of smaller, highly specialized, fine-tuned agents that communicate via standardized protocols like MCP. It is mathematically cheaper, it is operationally faster, and it is far more resilient than putting all your eggs in one monolithic AI basket.
Absolutely. And my number one takeaway connects directly to the implementation of that mesh.
Which is?
Evaluation and EU AI Act compliance absolutely cannot be an afterthought.
Say it again for the people in the back.
Seriously.
Yeah.
If you wait until your AI system is fully built to figure out how it makes decisions, you have already failed.
They're done.
Yeah. If you are building an agentic system in Europe today, you must architect the logging, the intermediate explainability, and the human oversight into the very foundation of the agents before they ever reach a production environment.
Right.
72% of projects fail because they ignore this foundational step. Don't let your enterprise be in the 72%.
Just show your work from day one.
Exactly. Show your work. And I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over.
Oh, I love these. Let's hear it.
So the AetherLink guide briefly touches on an emerging architectural trend for late 2026 and beyond, and they call it the rise of autonomous agent markets.
Autonomous agent markets. That sounds like an entirely different economy.
Well, it is basically the gig economy, but entirely for AI.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine a near future where your company's internal AI mesh encounters a highly niche problem that it just lacks the specific fine-tuning to solve.
Right, it hits a wall.
Exactly. But instead of failing or, throwing an error code to a human developer, your agents dynamically reach out into a secure digital marketplace.
Right, really?
Yes. They temporarily hire a specialized agent from a completely different company on a gig basis.
That is what...
They negotiate the API access themselves, they complete the specialized task together, they automatically pay for the compute via microtransactions, and then they just disconnect.
That is, honestly, that is mind-blowing.
So the question to leave you with is, how will your enterprise prepare to participate in an economy where your internal AI systems are not just software tools, but the primary buyers and sellers of digital services?
That fundamentally changes how we even define a company's capabilities.
It really does.
I guess it all goes back to that expectation of precision we talked about at the very beginning. We used to think of enterprise software as static plumbing that we built once.
Right.
But now we're realizing it's a living, breathing digital workforce that learns, adapts, and maybe soon it even hires its own help to get the job done.
The future is moving fast.
It really is. For more AI insights, visit etherlink.ai.